Yahoo Sports lists Zach LaVine as one of the potential targets by the Philadelphia 76ers this offseason, along with Klay Thompson. We'll talk a little bit about that. First, we'll talk about 3 free agent targets that Bleacher Report had listed for the Chicago Bulls and how much sense does that make. We're also going to continue our draft player profiles, looking at Oso Ighodaro as well. We're going to get into all that plus more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform that we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it for today. So we got Jake Fisher from Yahoo Sports, talking about the Philadelphia 76ers and their approach to the offseason. It's kind of been, rumored that the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be targeting Paul George if he does hit the free agent market. But outside of that, it looks like Klay Thompson, Caldwell Pope, and Zach LaVine are also listed by Yahoo Sports as targets that the Philadelphia 76ers have on their board for this offseason. Now, Klay Thompson is an outright free agent. It would make some sense that they could pursue him even with this. Klay isn't Klay anymore, right? Like, we know that Klay isn't the Klay of old, but he's still a player that can be damn well effective. The questions that you have to ask yourself when it comes to Klay Thompson is health, things like that. And then Zach LaVine is the interesting part because they would have to make a trade for Zach LaVine. Now, according to this, again, take this with a grain of salt from whatever you do, but they listed the fact that interest in Zach LaVine, for example, would be that if the Chicago Bulls or another team attach draft capital in an effort to move his salary. Now, that's where things start getting a little bit crazy to me. If the Bulls have to attach any type of draft capital to move on from Zach LaVine, to me, that is counterproductive. I would much rather the Bulls take expiring contracts, even if it's players that we can't use, than to give up future assets in the draft. We have given up enough assets, draft assets, to build this team. We don't need to give up further draft assets to tear this team down, right? Or to move off, not necessarily tear the team down, but to move off this team either, in my opinion. If that's what it comes to, right? We haven't heard a whole lot of that. We've heard that the Bulls, in kind of the other deals, getting heavily protected picks, things like that. But if it comes down to a point of the Bulls having to be the ones to attach draft capital, that's where you get to tripping. Just being frank, like that's counterproductive in my opinion. It doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense for where the Bulls are going. If they're moving on from Zach LaVine, to me, that means that they are doing that in a case to build a future, not necessarily give up a future to get rid of part of your present. It's not something that I like. Now, the Philadelphia 76ers are going to be a team that makes a lot of sense. They're going to be floated around for a lot of potential trade candidates, free agents, things like that. I've talked a lot about the Philadelphia 76ers offseason and how that could potentially impact the Chicago Bulls or any other team when it comes to like DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. The Philadelphia 76ers have like 4 players under contract for next season. They're going to be a team that they're going to have a lot of a true cap space. They're going to have to fledge a team, and they're looking to put together a formidable team around Joel Embiid to where that they can compete. And so it makes sense that they could be in on some of these other players and things like that. But if it gets to the point where you got to give up draft capital, to me, that's not where we're at right now. We don't want to do that. That's not a smart decision in my opinion, right? And maybe some Bulls fans, and please, if you guys feel differently about it, please do not hesitate to air your opinion in the comments. But I think that if you have to give up, and keep in mind the Bulls don't really have any second round picks to give up. So if you have to give up a first round pick, I don't care the protection on it or not, unless you're doing top 29 protected. Even then, I don't even know if I would do that, right? Like, and that kind of highlights the fact of finding a perfect trade partner for Zach LaVine. It's going to be really interesting to see what the Bulls do in that case. And it's why I've been saying for a while that Bulls fans are not going to be happy. They're not going to be happy at the return that the Bulls get back for Zach LaVine. Even if they don't have to give up a first round pick, they're not going to be a whole hell of a lot of happy if that's what they got to do, man. That's crazy. Yeah, I don't see a world in which that's happening. The Bulls give up a first round pick to try to move off of Zach LaVine. Maybe that's me being a homer. Maybe that's me being or something like that. Maybe I'm being too optimistic for a front office that doesn't deserve a whole lot of optimism. But it'll be interesting to see. Now, Jake Fisher also puts in this that Tobias Harris is not expected to be back. So that's going to, create more flexibility, which we already knew. I didn't expect Tobias Harris to be back for that Philadelphia 76ers team at all. But, it's going to be something funny or fun to watch what the Philadelphia 76ers do this offseason, because they could get lucky, right, and have a free agent really want to come and pair and work with Maxey, work with Joel Embiid, and that be a reason why they go to that Philadelphia team. Or it could be an offseason where the Philadelphia 76ers could be surprised and shocked by the lack of attention that's out there for their franchise, and how much they may have to try to overpay to just put a team together. And then what does that mean for Joel Embiid and his future there? That's going to be the interesting thing to watch about the Philadelphia 76ers. They can play spoiler. They can get some free agents that other teams have on the board just because they can offer them more. Or the Philadelphia 76ers can completely disappoint their fan base and wind up with a big goose egg of an offseason. But we'll see if that winds up on Zach LaVine being there. And, Zach LaVine could make some sense there in Philly, right? You have a defensive presence in Joel Embiid. But, him and Maxey next to each other, what does that look like, right? How does that balance kind of work out? But again, you're not looking at necessarily an extremely small backcourt if that's the case. Zach LaVine would have to adjust his game to kind of fit in, because I don't see them taking shots or opportunity or playmaking opportunities out of Tyrese Maxey's hand. And maybe that helps Zach LaVine. We talked about how Zach LaVine could potentially be better as an outright 2 or maybe even a 3, and how that can kind of get him to focus on just the things he does well, right? So if that ends up being the case, it'll be interesting to see the balance there. But you got to come with more for the Chicago Bulls than just the Bulls have to attach draft capital. That's I don't like that one. I don't like that one at all. But you guys can let me know what you guys think on that down below. Now, I talked about this on Locked on Bulls a little yesterday, so I'm not going to spend as much time on this here. But Bleacher Report had an article which they listed some realistic free agent options for the Chicago Bulls, and that was Buddy Hield, Caleb Martin, and Jalen Smith. Now, I think all those guys make sense for the Chicago Bulls in different senses. I think in where the Bulls are now, they make sense for the Bulls, right? And what we know that the Bulls' needs are. For example, three-point shooting has been an Achilles heel of the Chicago Bulls for so long. We were 26th and 27th in three-point shooting efficiency and attempts per game. Buddy Hield comes in as somebody who's a career 40% three-point shooter, taking 7.6 three-pointers per game. That's elite three-point shooting. That's what Buddy Hield brings. Even last season, 6.6 three-point shots per game, hit that at a 38.9% clip last year with the Philadelphia 76ers. Basically the same numbers with the Indiana Pacers as well, who he started his season off with last season, 38.4% on 6.9 three-point attempts last season for them. And he does contribute things outside of just the three-point shot. He's a solid rebounder for a guard at over 3 rebounds a game last season. He had 5 the season before that, as well as almost a steal per game. So Buddy Hield is a guy who can offer other things other than shooting, but the thing that the Bulls need the most, per how their roster's made up right now, is that three-point shooting, and Buddy Hield does bring that. And he's come off the bench, both for the Pacers last season and the Philadelphia 76ers. So he seems like a player that, as long as the role is there and the minutes are there, he'll be willing to accept a off-the-bench role. Now, maybe that does change per the things that the Bulls change on this roster, and I understand why Bleacher Report would have Buddy Hield listed as an option for the Chicago Bulls. But that would come down to the Bulls. All these options would come down to the Bulls clearing enough cap space to be able to use their full mid-level exception. Buddy Hield is a player that could fit into that. He'll probably take the full mid-level exception, but he is a player that could slide into that. And, Buddy Hield was a player that, where some talk around some outlets that maybe the Bulls were looking into trying to add Buddy Hield at the trade deadline when they're not doing anything. But I like Buddy Hield as a player. It's just that we don't know exactly what's going to change with this team. Three-point shooting can always be something, but Buddy Hield is going to have his fair share of suitors. And would he want to come to Chicago? I don't see Chicago outbuilding anybody else. Hell, we don't even know if we're going to be able to even create enough cap space right now to even be able to try to pursue somebody like Buddy Hield, even use our full mid-level exception. So that's things as well that you have to look into. I don't necessarily see it as a negative if the Bulls do and try to pursue a Buddy Hield. Again, I don't hate Buddy Hield as a player. He's just a player that has a very specific use case, and the Bulls could use that specific use case tremendously, right? So I like Buddy Hield being listed. I do think that that's a reasonable one to list. Next up, Caleb Martin, right? And Caleb Martin, to me, would be the player to replace Torrey Craig. Torrey Craig has a player option next season, and he may very well opt out because he may be able to get more out on the free agent market or at least join a team that's closer to competing or contending than the Chicago Bulls. If the Bulls were to lose Torrey Craig and replace him with Caleb Martin, I'm not mad at that. You look at Caleb Martin last season, 10 points per game, 4 rebounds per game as well, 43% shooter overall, somebody who's a solid team defender and solid enough from three-point range. 34.9% last year, 35% the year before that, taking 3.6 three-pointers last season. Caleb Martin is a decent enough three-point shooter to where you can't leave him open. You have to respect his three-point shot, and he's a consummate role player. He understands his role, and he can thrive in it. He also gets 4 rebounds per game last season, 2 assists per game, right under a steal per game, and under a block per game as well. He's a guy that he understands his role. He can operate well within that role. And so if he was a guy, he has a player option next season, I think $7.1 million. If he opts out and you can sign him for about that, a little bit more, well, it's less than the mid-level exception, but maybe a little bit more than that, I'm not mad at that deal for Caleb Martin. I think that he's a player that also can fit next to Io, fit next to Kobe if needed as well. If the Bulls do end up losing DeMar DeRozan, I think he's a guy that I wouldn't mind, taking on a larger role. Does he replace DeMar? No. I think still maybe you're looking at moving Pat to the 3, maybe at that point in time do some other things depending on what you do with your draft pick, stuff like that. But Caleb Martin isn't a name that I'd be mad at. It's not a name that really changes or ups the ceiling of the Chicago Bulls, but he's the type of player that you can use on the back end of your bench, or not even the back end, that you can use coming off your bench, and they can even do some spot starting for you as well and be solid enough to where he's not hurting your team, right? He can be a plus role player, and I'm not mad at that. The most points per game in his career last year, still a young enough player as well at 28 years old, right? So younger than like a Torrey Craig. I wouldn't be mad if the Bulls lost Torrey Craig and Caleb Martin ends up being that replacement for the role that he has. I'm not mad at it. I think he'll fit next to Alex Caruso as well. Kind of fits the identity of the team. I would love to see the Bulls still keep Javonte Green in that case, but having like a rotation on your wing that can use Javonte, use Caleb Martin, I'm not really mad at that. So Caleb Martin is another one that I think is a realistic kind of target for the Chicago Bulls if he does opt out as well. And then they had Jalen Smith. Now, I understand the Jalen Smith aspect of it. 6'9", 215 pounds, can play power forward or center. When you look at it as well, not a huge rim protector in that case, right? Has never averaged, well, he did in 2021-22, he averaged a block per game, but that was the only season he averaged a block per game. But, a solid enough rebounder, can play in the system, a cool enough defender, right? Doesn't, shoots the 3, 42% last year, only taking 2.5. So not a 3-point threat, but is somebody who you have, like, if he's left open, he can shoot the three ball on you, right? So a career 33% three-point shooter. I'm not mad at that. The thing with Jalen Smith is, I think he's going to get offered a whole hell of a lot of money. I also think that you can get somebody who has more upside at the same position in this draft this year. So that's kind of where I would like the Bulls to focus at, more so than going out and getting somebody you'll have to pay more than a rookie to come in, and a rookie can potentially do as well. And so Jalen Smith, I understand why they have him on this list, but considering the depth at the big man position, the power forward and center in this draft, I'd kind of rather the Bulls kind of focus on that in the draft than go out and spend a bunch of money on that, especially because he doesn't fix. I would rather the Bulls spend the money on bringing more three-point shooting to this team than somebody that they can get on a rookie scale contract in the draft. That's just kind of my personal opinion. You guys can let me know what you guys think on those 3 players down below, as always. But let's go ahead and get into it. We're continuing our draft player coverage today. And you guys know I've been going deep in the bag of kind of more so the outliers. Right now, the player that we're going to be covering today is a player that I want to be clear here. In no way am I saying the Bulls should draft at number 11. But I am covering people that if the Bulls do acquire a second-round pick through whatever trades they make or whatever else, I want us to have kind of a comprehensive list of some of those players as well. And this player that I'm going to talk about today is Oso Ighodaro. Now, this is a player out of Marquette, a 5-year senior as well, so he should be able to step in and understand his role. The thing is, very solid passer at the forward position, a little bit undersized, 6'9.5", has that 6'11" wingspan, 222 pounds, so he has an NBA body. He's going to be 22 years old, right? Extremely well-rounded defender. This guy can immediately step in and play defense in almost any NBA system as well. He can switch guard multiple positions as well. And if he's playing next to kind of a center that is a better rim protector, I know we don't have that here. It could bring out the most in this game because he's not a shot rim protecting threat really at all. He can block some shots via his wingspan and things like that, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a rim protector. He can rotate out on the perimeter. He has the lateral quickness to be able to do that. He has some size to be able to finish around the rim as well. He's a really high IQ basketball player as well. I would not saying that he will have this type of impact, but I would say this is would be your Taj Gibson-like pick, a pick of a guy that you look at and say, yeah, he was solid overall in college, but he end up playing a nice role for you, especially off the bench, right? He was used in Marquette a lot for his playmaking, which is something that in the NBA, we're seeing more and more bigs be able to play make, and especially if you have those guards kind of out on their perimeter that can do some things, he could do that. He's really good at bounce passing. He can make elbow passes, things like that as well. He can thread the needle. I can see this guy being a solid passer at the NBA level as well. He sets screens really hard. He rolls to the basket. He can finish on lobs and things like that. This is a guy that I listen, I don't think he's going to win any awards at the NBA level, but I think he's one of those guys that if you draft, you're always going to love what he brings to your team. I really like that. Soft touch. He has a solid hook shot that he developed over those years as well. When you look at his college production as well, got better every year in college. His first year in college in 2020-21, only 1.2 points per game. He only played 5 games, 7.6 minutes per game. His second season, 32 games played, no starts, but he averaged 5 points per game in that, 3 rebounds, right under a block, right under assists. Then his junior year, that's really where he took off. Started all 36 games his junior year, scored 11 points, had in that time 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 blocks per game, 1 steal per game, and then his senior year where he brought it all together. 13.5 points per game on 57% shooting, took no threes at all, right? So he's not, he understands his role. He's not going to be one of those guys that's going to come out there and try to shoot the lights out or anything like that. Doesn't really shape up to develop that either. 7 rebounds his senior year as well, 3 assists, 1.3 blocks per game, 1 steal per game as well. This is a guy, like I said, he's the type of guy you draft in the second round that can come in and make an impact on your bench. And, he is projected to be drafted actually in the second round. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes higher up in the second round as well. Maybe within that first kind of 5 to 10 picks in the second round, he may be taken. But this is a guy who I think can bring a lot of things. He's undersized, but you don't like the strength that he has and the way that he plays. You don't really kind of notice that as long. He's basically just a 4 at the next level. Maybe he can guard some 3s and 4s, right? He can maybe even guard some 5s. But, that's really it. He's not a shooting threat at all. He doesn't take a whole hell of a lot of jumpers. He's not the best free throw shooter either, which, brings some of his own concerns. He's a career 61% free throw shooter in his college career. So take that for what you will. And this is a guy that I wanted to cover because I think that guys like him are some of the guys that you end up drafting that you kind of forget you're even in this draft. He may go away. He may spend some time, honestly, down in the G League, but eventually get called up and people are like, hey, where was he drafted at again? What year did he come out at? And so I think that this is a guy who really could, his skill sets in running the floor, being a playmaker, especially because he's not a 3-point shooter, being a playmaker, but can finish around the rim, can finish on the lobs, can run in a faster paced offense, can switch defensively. I think that this is a guy who can be a solid role player at the next level. And if for some reason, I haven't seen it, but if a team sees and thinks that they can develop some 3-point shooting out of this guy, I could see a team really biting on him early in that second round and him turning into a decent role player for him. So this is the type of guy that I want to cover in the next week or so, kind of cover more guys that could potentially go in the second round. I know the Bulls don't have a second round pick, but we didn't have a second round pick last year either, right? So, second round picks are one of those things that if a team is really aggressive and really wants a second round pick, they can buy one, right? They can get a second round pick, especially in a draft where, some teams may be looking to move off some things. I wouldn't be surprised I don't even know if the OKC Thunder have second round picks, but considering they are a team that always has, more picks coming in than roster spots, maybe they're a team that you can get a second round pick from or buy it from or something like that. So if the Bulls were to get into the second round, players like PJ Hall, players like Oso Ighodaro, those are players that I would love to be on the Chicago Bulls board because these are players that I think can provide some quality depth at, right? They'll always probably be back end of the bench players, but we've seen before, back end of the bench players matter, and they do create a difference in how your team operates and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised, if a team picks him up and then he ends up turning into a solid role player for him. But let me know what you guys think, as always, down below. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.